To many, this looks like the quintessential Celtic house. The style dominated Britain and Ireland for perhaps 3,000 years. It was a style shared in the western coastal regions of northern Spain and Portugal, were generally agreed to have been Celtic within the historical period. But what if I told you that this style, so captivating and relatively unique in Europe, for that very reason, has a much more ancient and mysterious origin?
So this is the entrance of Citânia de Sanfins. It's the second largest Celtic site dating to prior to the Roman period in Portugal. But as you can see, it doesn't really expect too many tourists up here. I'm assuming that used to be a ticket office. It's well, pretty much just non-functioning. There's a chair in there that's still wrapped in plastic. Anyway, I guess that means that there's no ticket fee. So here we have our entrance map. It's very windy today, by the way. It's been raining like the whole time we've been in Portugal. It's been terrible. You know, people expect to come to Portugal and have like nice weather or something, but it's not been at all. It's this time of year, right? So here's the site. It's quite impressive. So it is, of course, a hill fort. And boy, is it ever a hill fort. It's quite a drive up here. And on top of the drive, you got to hike a bit. It's quite a place with an outstanding view. Now, it is so windy here that I'm not sure you're going to be able to hear anything that I'm saying. And unfortunately, my external mic is not working. So we have to make do with what we got. Oh, and it started to rain again. Anyway, here, let's head into the reconstructed houses and see if they keep out the rain. Now, one thing that's frequently commented on when people talk about hill forts and how they couldn't have been places of residence, number one thing that comes up is access to water. So, because there's no detectable cisterns in many of these sites, including this one, where people clearly resided permanently, people are suspicious as to how exactly, and sorry for the wind here, how exactly they survived. How did they get their water? Well, there's a pretty simple explanation for that. And that is, they just gathered water and likely used one of the buckets to store it. It has been raining here a lot, as I explained. And just in natural pools in the rocks up here, there's a huge amount of water just laying about. So you can capture rainwater and store it, in ways that doesn't necessarily leave an archaeological footprint that you're going to find 2,000 years later or more. Okay, so here we are in the reconstruction of some of these houses. Finally out of the wind, maybe you can hear me. Here, I'll take you through. This is my first time walking through as well. And it's raining outside. And, well, the thatch in here could be better, as you can see. But this site isn't exactly much used. At least, seemingly not in this season, at least. So a lot of the thatch was blown off and is laying on the ground about here. So this is my first tour through this site. I gotta say, I'm quite impressed, even though this site doesn't seem to be actively maintained. Oh, as you can see along the pathway, that's all thatch from the roof that's blown off in various storms. They've had a lot of storms here recently. But even with the missing thatch, inside is still fairly dry and sheltered from the wind, because it is very windy out there. So the construction of this site totally blocks the wind, or almost totally blocks all wind from the outside. So even though it's extremely windy right now, and there's a rainstorm going on, in here it's actually fairly pleasant, although it would be better if all the thatch was in place. There's a stone with a hole in it. So we're in one of the central homes that they've reconstructed here. And as you can see, because of the thatch missing off the roof from various storms and it not being repaired, it could be in a better state, but it's still quite comfortable, quite sheltered from the wind. And here's our central pillar. The axis mundi of the home. So some years ago, I did a video called "Why Do the Celts Build Roundhouses?" But of course, in the video I explained it's more specific than that, because the roundhouse isn't even pan-Celtic. Instead, it's concentrated in Britain, Ireland, and in northern Spain and Portugal. Now, the reason is because the roundhouse isn't even Celtic at all. Not specifically Celtic, at least in the way that we think of the Celts as originating in Hallstatt, or from the Latin period, right? So the Celts of Central Europe are in some ways culturally distinct from those who would become Celtic speakers in the Atlantic fringes, because there they maintained a Bronze Age, more elements of a Bronze Age culture, which was common to the Atlantic zone, sometimes called the Atlantic Bronze Age. And it was in that Atlantic Bronze Age that the roundhouse becomes an established form and becomes a kind of cultural symbol that persists into the medieval period. So it isn't that roundhouses are Celtic, it's that they're pre-Celtic, and they're common to that Bronze Age Atlantic zone. After being in this sheltered environment, I'm actually fearing to go back out into there, into the open again, because it's so windy and cold. I actually have a toque with me. And if you're Canadian, you'll know what a toque is. Because, well, let's face it, I don't got that much hair up there. I'm going to give you guys a taste of just how windy. In here, snug as a bug. So yeah, they could withstand some pretty severe weather up here. And let's face it, Portugal, especially northern Portugal, isn't perpetually warm, right? This is an Atlantic climate zone. And so in the winter, it gets cold here. They get snow. And yet there was a permanent population here of many hundreds. If not, maybe even low thousands, like based on the remains that I'm seeing here. I haven't looked into the site details extensively, so I'm not sure what the experts of the site suggest the population to be. But it could have even been like 1,000 or 1,500. So not all of the housing here would have actually housed people, but very likely they would have been keeping animals in here as well. Not only do the animals probably need shelter up here at certain times of the year, but there is also the fact that animals generate heat. And so in the winter, if you keep animals in close with you, it can actually heat up the environment that you're staying in. And I imagine in winter up here, because right now it's April, in fact, towards the end of April, and it's still pretty chilly here today, especially with the wind and the rain. These little corridors, I suspect, are for traveling between one household and another, and while staying out of the wind and rain and snow. Now, of course, notice that none of this is built with mortar. They didn't have mortar in the Iron Age, and so all of their stone buildings had to be fitted very nicely together without mortar. People today still build dry stone walls, right? It can be time consuming, and there's definitely an art involved in it, an extra level of skill. So the Iron Age Celts did use some nails. I've seen some examples in local museums, but they would have primarily been joining wood using joinery techniques. Now, in this reconstruction, they're primarily using nails, looks to me. But I don't imagine that would have been typical. I think nails would have been an exception rather than a rule. Well, I still got one other such site to hit today, and it's even bigger than this one, so check back with you.
Now, this strange-looking stone is actually the doorway to the bathhouse. You would have to crawl through that hole to get in. And the purpose is to trap the hot air and steam inside so that it can't escape, since the hot air rises. Very ingenious.
These are the Bronze Age implements that are a product of the bell beaker culture and later subsequent following cultures. They're very similar to what you find in other places in Europe. It's this similarity that is likely behind the similarity between something like the Castro culture and the Iron Age and Bronze Age British and Irish cultures, which are generally identified as Celtic, but have an even older ancient similarity.
Who knows if this video will even come out because the camera is soaked and it's not waterproof. And I forgot my phone in the car, and I'm running short on time, so I can't go back to get it. But yeah, it's a pretty massive place. Must have had at least 1,000 people living here, probably much more than that. And again, very similar housing design, and this sort of avenues, corridors as created with the stone.
Now, what I was trying to point out here before the internal mic and the camera totally gave out was the external wall that goes all around the site. And there's also several gates. The original height of the walls was likely even higher than this, probably 15 feet or more. Now, this building here was like a town council. You can see the benches that run all along the interior of the circle. This was the seating positions for all of the elders in the community, and they would sit here and discuss and plan, debate, and decide on all sorts of issues, from building a new house or a road to going to war. Now, the community would have been led by a king, but the king was not some sort of dictator. The king was surrounded by a council of all of the elders of the community, and it was them who would effectively decide. The king's role was instead to carry out the decision that the community had made. So what I was saying here is that not only is the hill more defensible than flat ground, but it also gives you other advantages, primarily sight. So you can see an enemy approaching from a distance, and it gives you time to prepare. But it also gives you an advantage over controlling your territory in general. So you can see what is going on, you can see who is doing what down below in the agricultural lands. Now, after escaping the terrible rain in Portugal that we experienced, we went back to Spain, and I visited a site just across from the Portuguese border.
So I'm here today at beautiful Castro de Santa Triga. And as you can see, there is a lot of semi-reconstruction work. There is some full reconstructions, which we will see in a minute. And there's also areas that are left fairly unreconstructed, so that you can see the remains in a more natural state. This is an Iron Age Hillfort, and one of, not necessarily the bigger ones, but certainly one of the best preserved, and in one of the most iconic and beautiful places you can imagine. Compared to a place like Britons, this is actually quite small, but it has the same kind of layout, the same kind of housing structure, and the same kind of outer defenses. Let's go take a closer look. I'm unsure if all of these narrow passageways were actually intended for use, because some of them are just so narrow that I would find it hard to believe that people could actually fit through them very easily. Now, granted, they're likely somewhat smaller than modern people, and certainly they were not overweight, but even still, it's difficult. Like, I'm going to have a hard time fitting through some of these places. But there is a possibility that they were designed intentionally that way for defensive purposes. So if you have this close-knit network of houses that are stone, not only do you have outer defensive walls, but if the enemy gets in, you also have this inner network of like maze-like pathways that are easily held by even just one or two people. I'll try to make my way through some of these narrow ways now without smashing my camera. Yeah, so a lot of them, right, they have main roadways, you could think of them, and narrow corridors between the different housing units that were likely separate family groups. It's a lot nicer here than it was yesterday in Braga, I could tell you. Braga was something else. I still got kind of a headache from that because it was just so wet and cold. So along here we have the outer defensive walls. And coming up here, we have what would have been one of the old gateways. This one's not been reconstructed. There's one over there I'll show you in a minute that is. But we'll show you the natural state of it, or more or less natural state of it. So down there would have been the old pathway used, or at least one of the old pathways used to come up here. Now this is a very steep hill, and likely one of the main things that people are doing up here is pastoralism, and that would have been a big part of their economy. But as the situation stabilized, as safety improved, and they started moving more towards settled agriculture, then they had to move their communities down into the fertile lowlands. And that's why these sites were actually abandoned. I did a video some years ago saying the Celts didn't have chairs. And that is basically true. But in this particular case, there may be a case for a chair. What do you think? I'll try. Maybe more like a bed. Now, it's important to notice that the Proto-Celts of the Hallstatt culture didn't primarily, or even at all really, build roundhouses. I think there was a couple circular structures in some of the Hallstatt period homes, but it isn't clear if they were houses or they were just used as cattle pens or what. So these round structures are unique to the Atlantic Bronze Age and descendant cultures of Britain, Ireland, Northern Spain, and Portugal. So were roundhouses Celtic? Well, not particularly. They were inherited by British and Irish Celts when they came to speak Celtic languages, and likely those in this region as well, who probably ended up speaking a Celtic language through assimilation, through cultural exchange, and through some migrations. But the form itself predates the Celts in these areas and was simply continued on. So I'm now on top of the walls. Not a bad place to live. Not today, at any rate. Maybe in the winter it would not have the same appeal. Now, here's another example of one of those porches. It's even a better example than the last one I tried to use. So it's got this front doorway here. See? You can see where it's carved out along the stone, where they fitted a door. Then you come in through the door, And there's this porch kind of area. And another entranceway. On either side, there are large stones, possibly seating areas. See? That looks like it could have been some kind of seating area, possibly. And then you have the main building. Now, this is definitely a chair, right? Or am I crazy? It looks to me like a chair built right into the wall. But maybe it had a different purpose. I don't know. To me, it looks cozy. I think I'll take a seat. Yeah, it works. Maybe you could use some cushions. I'm sure that they probably had some. So this is the reconstructed gateway. And, you know, it's pretty formidable fortifications for an Iron Age site. So let's go through here. These are pretty big megalithic stones. They would have been difficult to move in and of themselves. Here's some outer fortifications. Now, down there, you can see how they've reconstructed one of those buildings with the porches I was talking about. However, I don't think that this reconstruction is actually accurate to what we actually saw in the archaeology. So, the entrance stone is on many of them that I saw intentionally carved in, which shows a door line. Whereas they haven't reconstructed a door there. But it seems to me that many of them had an enclosed porch, a sealed porch with a door. I'm getting a bit pedantic here, but this is what I'm talking about, see? This suggests that there was something here blocking this door, that there was something fixed here. Which suggests that this porch wasn't just an open space. Okay. I don't know if we can go in here because unfortunately, this place is even worse maintained than some of the other ones we saw. So the thatch has completely come apart and it's made it very wet in here. Oh, okay, I'm in. It's quite muddy though. It really wouldn't have been though if this roof was maintained, but as you can see, it's a holy roof. Now here, there were some examples down there of these kinds of stones in the center of the house. So this is following the archaeology of the site. What is the purpose of that stone? Is it a chair with a cup holder? Probably not.
Whoa! I'm so big, but look! That's...
The thatch is much better on this one, but the entranceway needs some leveling up, I think. We'll try to make our way in. Hopefully I don't get wet feet. I know. I'll hop over. Not exactly a hop, but... It's hard getting around with all this camera and bag and stuff. Okay. Here we have some example of reconstructed benches along the side here. And we got a nice little window. Look at this. Isn't this cute? It comes with a good view too. Take a look.
Another interpretation of this centerpiece is as a setup for some type of fire, a fire pit of some kind. Now, you can see there's black marks here. I don't know if those are actually ancient or if they're, in fact, modern. Someone's lit a fire in here. But certainly you would need some kind of heating in here. And it would, of course, make sense to have that centrally located. Unfortunately, I've got more places to go and more to see. So as much as I might like to spend the rest of the day here, I have to kind of get moving. But it's a beautiful place, full of wonderful history. And this giant dead tree. Who knows what kind of things it might have seen. Quite a view here. So I'm here at the famous site of Numantia, the stronghold of the Celtiberians who resisted the Roman Empire for many years and fought many victorious battles against them, including defeating an army of 20,000. Now, the Romans backstabbed them several times because they actually made peace treaties with them that the Romans then refused to honor later. They would basically just sue for peace whenever they lost a battle. And then later they would say, oh, well, the Senate didn't actually approve that peace, so it doesn't count. Now, what you'll notice about the Celtiberian site is that they do not use roundhouses, right? So we're in Galicia and northern Portugal. The Celtic associated peoples there were building roundhouses in the tradition of the Atlantic Bronze Age. Here, the Celts are carrying on the traditions of the Central European Celts, and that is to build rectangular housing, primarily at least. So right now I'm within the reconstruction of one of these Celtiberian homes. A very complete reconstruction with fireplace, ovens, a place for baking breads. And you can really see and get an idea of how they lived. And fundamentally, even though this is an Iron Age home, the lifestyle wasn't actually that much different from much of the medieval period.
So within Spain itself, we can see this distinction between what you can call the Atlantic Bronze Age culture and the Central European Celtic culture. So the Atlantic culture has roundhouses, whereas the Central European Celtic culture has primarily rectangular buildings. And we'll get into more of the details about that Atlantic Bronze Age in a future video. So if you like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Consider supporting the channel through Patreon or PayPal, or through YouTube Super Stickers. You can also become a member of the channel. Thank you all for watching, and as always, stand tall.